thank you all for sticking around, because I have to tell you, while flying out from New York yesterday, I was talking about this guy on the plane. I said, I'm so excited to interview him. Can anybody imagine what that was like? To be the guy responsible for all of us, everything that we carry around, the beginning of that, the genesis of that. I mean, who knew? And I'm going to ask you how much you knew, but before I even get to that, I was reminded of the antiquated cell phones when I happened to be channel surfing the other day, and in one day I got a glimpse of Michael Douglas, the actor, in the movie Wall Street as Gordon Gekko, who had everything at his fingertips. That thing was this clunker. Do you remember that? It looked like it was like a 5-pound, something was growing out of his head. And then also in Pretty Woman with Julia Roberts, you had the same with Richard Gere. He was at the cusp of everything. And it was really cool that he was holding this big, huge phone, next to his. I was laughing when I looked at them and thought of you, because I wondered, what was your entity like? Was it 73 when you were on that street?
Now that I know that every time you see an archaic phone, you think of me.
Not at all. No, I just want to pick your brain on all this. Sit right down. Oh my gosh, I'm making them leave. So.
Well, Alex, if you think that was a big phone, what do you
that
think
was
of that?
Look at that. Look at that. I didn't even know you brought that.
This is what the very first cell phone looked like. This phone, you can see how big it is.
I want to hold this thing. Seriously, I want to put it
It
like a Gordon Gekko, right?
This phone weighed 2.5 pounds. It had a 20-minute battery life, but that wasn't a problem because you couldn't hold it up for more than 20 minutes.
This is it. Well, anyway, look where we've come from. I mean, let's do the math. What was that, like 40-ish years ago? Not even quite.
Yeah, 38 years.
And you think about this, first of all, when you were on this type of an instrument, or if not this exact thing, what went through your mind as you realized that you'd had synapse, you had created something and it worked?
Well, I hate to remove all the drama from this, but what was on my mind was, is this thing going to work for the next 10 minutes? Because, people don't realize how long 38 years ago is. And we had no integrated circuits, no digital cameras, no internet, no personal computers. And in order to build this phone, we had to put together literally thousands of discrete parts. And you could imagine what the probability of having something like that work for more than 10 minutes at a time. So whenever I demonstrated that unit, there was always an engineer standing by to do the repair work, and it was a nerve-wracking experience.
What was the genesis for you? What got your mind spinning into the ability to create this? Where did it come from?
Well, we're talking about 38 years ago. Telephone service was a monopoly. Everybody remember the old AT&T?
And we should say you were with Motorola at the time.
I was with Motorola. AT&T was the biggest company in the world by every measure, and they had invented a thing called cellular telephony. And their version of cellular telephony was, first of all, it was going to be a monopoly. There was only going to be one provider of service. And secondly, their version of cell phones was car phones. Well, I was with a little company called Motorola at that time. We objected to both of those premises. First of all, we believed in competition. And we also believed that we ought to stay in business, and we would have been out of business if AT&T had prevailed. And the second thing we believed is that the world was ready for true personal communications. For 100 years, we had been told that in order to make a phone call, we had to be leashed to our desks, chained into our homes, and that was the only way to communicate. And now AT&T comes along, and instead of trapping us in our homes and in our offices, they're going to trap us in our cars. We just thought that was wrong. We had to persuade our government agencies that somebody else besides AT&T could do this. And of course, we thought we could. And it occurred to me that the way to do this was to do a dazzling demonstration, and that's exactly what we did, Alex. We created not only this phone that you looked at, but the infrastructure, the stations that supported it, and we lugged those things to New York and to Washington. We talked to a lot of journalists, talked to a lot of people in government, and guess what? We won.
You did indeed. Was this the first thing you had ever invented?
Well, no, I've been inventing since I was a child.
So what was the first thing? I'm just curious.
Oh, you remember I'm a techie, but well, when I was 8 years old, I conceived of a train that would go in a tunnel that was evacuated, so there wasn't any friction, air friction, and the train was driven by magnetic propulsion.
He was
and
8.
would you believe they're just starting to build these things now? If I was smart enough when I was 8 years old, I would have patented it, but I didn't.
Well, that's pretty remarkable. And Sherry was mentioning in your introduction that you have done so many other things. Of what are you most proud of the things that you've invented? I mean, is this it, given where it went? Because you did that, I believe, when you were in your 40s, and so that's a point for this particular conference when you talk about technology for life, and we're talking about boomers and silvers specifically. You were, by some estimations, at least at that time, at the apex of your career, and yet there are a lot of people here who will defy that and say, are you kidding me? I'm still creating things in my 50s and 60s and 70s and beyond, because the innovation of the mind doesn't necessarily have to be age-related.
Well, I deeply resent the whole concept of putting people in boxes just because of their age or any other characteristic. So actually, you asked me what the thing I'm most proud of. I was quoted once in Reader's Digest. How many people here have been quoted in Reader's Digest? But, as saying the best way to get people to think out of the box is not to create the box in the first place. And it's my view that most of the problems in the world today are caused by the inability of people to look at the fundamentals. They want to generalize and put everybody in boxes.
Why, are we lazy?
I'm sorry.
Are we lazy?
No, well, it's just
creative?
it's just a way of thinking, but the whole concept, for example, of having different kinds of engineers, electrical engineers, mechanical, and yet I know of no problem that we engineers have to solve that doesn't involve all the disciplines. So we somehow have to change our whole educational system, our ways of looking at things. We in our discussion, we talked about the concept of boomers versus seniors. These are categories, and I don't know anybody that fits in these categories. I know people that are retired and have different priorities. I know people that get older and maybe their eyesight is not as good as it used to be. But let me tell you, as far as I know, people's minds only deteriorate when they stop using them.
Yeah.
And so when people talk to me about, well, when did you stop creating? Well, I stopped creating when I stopped thinking about things, and I hope I haven't stopped thinking. So.
I don't think you have. We had dinner together last night. The guy doesn't stop thinking. With regard to technology today that is geared towards an aging society, not those that are of a certain age, just an aging society, what are you most impressed by, or what do you think has yet to be accomplished? Where do you think we need to do more work?
Well, almost everything has yet to be accomplished. There are very few products that are really optimized for people that have the problems of aging. The one example that I have, because I lived through it, is the Jitterbug phone, which my wife, Arlene Harris, created. Arlene is sitting off in the corner. I think she's reading her email, so she won't. But the unique thing about the Jitterbug phone is lots of analysis and understanding of what the experience is, not some theoretical something, because I have been told that a 35 or 25-year-old engineer can really design something for an older person. He just has to have fuzzy glasses and gizmos on his hand to slow him down. My viewpoint of that is when you have an engineer trying to do that, what you have is a 25-year-old with gadgets on him that has no way of thinking like an older person. So the challenge of actually understanding the experience is really difficult. I think we came very close with the Jitterbug phone, but it took a huge amount of work, most of which is not even obvious. My wife is a genius at this thing and had to create the complete infrastructure to make the user experience good. We've only started to do that. You walk into a Verizon store or an AT&T store. I hope there's nobody here from either of those companies. But you walk into that store and all the phones look the same. You ever notice that? Mm-hmm. They're all either smartphones or feature phones. They all have cameras. There is not a recognition that people are different from each other. Every person has his own likes and dislikes, and good marketers, people that really manufacture and try to understand their constituencies, will build devices that serve the needs of every part of their constituency. Mm-hmm. So what's an example of that? Well, I'm sure most of you have bought a car at some point. When you buy a car today, you can almost design every detail of that car to your own likes. You can pick the size of the car from a tiny car to a huge behemoth. You can pick the color, the upholstery, every feature. You can literally design your own car. Try to do that with a cell phone, and you obviously will not be successful. So the challenge is the recognition that people are different from each other, and there are lots of attributes of silvers, mm-hmm. Of people who are older and who have more experience. There's a thought that maybe they're smarter too. One example that I can give you is I have a resentment to people who think that what technology is something that will completely occupy your people with the technology itself. What's an example of that? I call it the Bill Gates phenomenon. Bill Gates created a wonderful device called a computer, and he expects in order for all of us to use his device, we all have to become engineers. And then Steve Jobs came along and he improved that to some degree, made the Apple devices, at least at that time, more user-friendly. But people have forgotten that the purpose of technology is to make our lives better, more convenient, more productive, and not to occupy our time with a bunch of nonsense that we really don't need to know in the first place. So what's the, thank you for my constituency out. What's the definition of good technology? Think about this. Is going to be a really profound thing, even though Reader's Digest hasn't published it yet. Good technology is invisible, transparent, intuitive. If it's really good technology, you don't even know it's there. If it's good technology, it's there, but it doesn't get in your way. It helps you achieve your objectives. And about the only really good example I can think of offhand is the transmission in a car. Has anybody here, when you buy a new car, ever looked at the instruction manual to see how to turn the car on? And yet the transmission is one of the most complex devices that we ever encounter. It's electrical, mechanical, electronic, hydraulic. And do you care? Of course not. All you want is to get in that car and drive, and I can get in a car anywhere in the world without even thinking about it. That's good technology. A cell phone, where you buy the cell phone and the instruction manual is bigger and heavier than the cell phone. Yeah. Well, you tell me whether that's good technology.
We know the answer to that one. I think we've all been a little frustrated by that. I'm curious, relative to this particular crowd, and our focus here with Silver Summit, Michael Rogers, who writes a column for MSNBC.com as well as the New York Times, and it's called The Practical Futurist. Here's a line from him, and he says, "Baby boomers are not the fast adopters when it comes to new technology, but they are the fast followers." Do you agree with that statement? And if so, I'm going to presume that it's not necessarily the way we want to go moving forward. So how do we become the fast adapters?
Well, of course, we're back to my thing about boxes, Alex.
Yeah.
I'm not sure all baby boomers are the same as all other ones. I think they're all different. We ought to talk about different kinds of people, and there are early adopters, and there are followers. The real issue is to make our products useful to whatever the constituency is. And so you have to think about what their characteristics are. It's easy for me to think about silvers because a lot of silvers are retired. Well, retired people somehow don't have the urgency that some of the younger people do. So email, which it's not a great urgency for me, although I read my email at least 3 or 4 different ways. But to tell you the truth, the email on my cell phone is essentially worthless because I'm always going to be at a computer within the next half hour or an hour, and I don't mind waiting. There are a lot of people, Arlene included, because I caught her reading her email, who just somehow want the email to be there instantly. Good, let's serve those people, but let's think about the people who are perhaps have acquired the wisdom of age and realize that you don't have to have this stuff immediately. And let's find devices, services that are useful to them.
So
and that's the challenge.
Do you feel that lifestyle needs drives technology right now? Or do you think innovation creates new ways of living our lives?
Well, I'm not sure I understand that, but let me tell you, the way I could describe that is, let's go back to this AT&T thing about how monopolies create products. I can't see many people with gray hair here. If you remember, AT&T had a thing called Bell Laboratories, and Bell Laboratories would think of ideas. This is what we think people want. And they would finally come up with some product idea, and then they would turn it over to another part of AT&T, which was Western Electric. They'd manufacture it, and then they'd go to the operating companies, and the operating companies would come to you, the consumer, and say, here it is, this is what you want. Now that's exactly backwards, because the real way to create products is to really think about what it is that's going to make somebody's life more convenient, more productive. Maybe it's going to entertain them, educate them, whatever it is, something that makes their lives better, and create that product and then present it to them. It's the consumer who should be deciding, not somebody in a laboratory somewhere. So that really is the challenge. And the reason I think the world is changing in that regard is I looked at one of the displays here that actually is produced by the people who do this Silver Summit, where they have all these applications. There are people coming up with creative ways to use all the tools that we have, and who decides which ones we end up using? We make those decisions. We vote either by putting the app on our cell phone or by buying it, but the world is moving in that direction. It's moving away from corporations and engineers deciding what's good for us to we the consumers are king. We should make those decisions.
There's something that I always get worried about when it comes to older people, because I report all the time about scams and the like. And I think when it comes to technology and cell phone communication, the smartphones and the like, oftentimes you have to worry about security on these devices. Do you think that has been adequately well addressed? Not only for the young whippersnappers, if you will, who know how to, gizmo out their phones and different things, but older people, to protect them from being conned or for having their information ripped off. Do you think it has been adequately done, or do you think it have a greater element of ease to it to allow people to just secure themselves?
Well, there is one solution to all of these things, and that's called education. And if in fact you assume that people are smart, and that is my fundamental presumption, you can teach people about what is a dumb thing to do and what's a smart thing. The issues of privacy and security, these are all new problems for us. And when it comes to privacy, well, if there's anybody here that thinks that they have any privacy left, well, you're kidding yourself. Because you are being monitored, looked at, measured every minute of the day. You can't buy anything, you can't walk through an airport or the convention hall in Las Vegas without being photographed, measured, identified, and records being kept. So forget it. But security, the part that you mentioned, now that really is important. Are you sure that you want your medical data? Because that's one of the big future things, and I hope you're going to ask me about that later.
Next.
If you want your medical data available to people around the world, then you've got to be a little crazy, because there are all kinds of things they can do with that information that could be harmful to you. So we have to very carefully look at this issue of how do we manage people's personal data, and we're only doing a fair job at the moment, and you know that because you read the papers, and you know that there are all kinds of databases being hacked, and there are actually governments now actively engaged in trying to hack into other governments and other people's databases. So we have to work very hard on this security issue. But as far as what consumers do, it's got to be education. We started to learn that with email. Everybody here knows that if you get an email from somebody, I hope you know this, that you don't know, and it's got an attachment to it, don't open the attachment. Because you are going to get hacked at some point. So we do have to learn how to do that. I kind of resent the concept of people are going to take care of me, and especially if somebody's going to, because I have silver hair, is going to treat me differently than someone else. I think we have to protect everyone and educate everybody.
Well, when it comes to healthcare, I know that there are folks in Washington who are trying to build the concept of putting this one giant database. I mean, there is certainly anecdotal evidence for putting that together. Let's say that you are, you're a resident of Nevada. You have gone on vacation in Washington, or you may be heading overseas, and you become ill, and you're incapacitated to a point where you're not able to tell a physician in an ER about what your medicines are and the kinds of procedures you've had. So while there is reason to put something like that together that would have access to your personal history, you're indicating that there are issues with that as well.
Well, first of all, you can't argue about the importance of that. If you can create a database that helps people, that makes their lives, I'm back to the same mantra, makes their lives better, protects them when they're traveling, of course we should do that. And that's a major, major issue. Every one of us has encountered that. Every time you go to the doctor's office, what's the first thing that happens when you walk in the office? Everybody know that? They hand you the clipboard, right?
Fill it out, right.
And you fill out not one form, but you fill out about 5 times, putting the same information on each sheet. And of course, when you get in to see the doctor, he's never looked at any of it.
No, and he asks you all the questions.
So that's archaic, and what we need to solve that problem is a new generation of doctors, among other things. But yes, there have to be those kinds of databases, and the databases have to be secure. So that we've got a problem of, yes, there is a need, but we've got to be very careful about how we manage those data.
What are the lessons that you think we can learn from this economic downturn? I mean, I'm not going to date you, but I will say that the beginning of your life was around that time of the Great Depression, and this country had to learn so much from that. I mean, we're in tough times now. I mean, you can't argue with that. Are there lessons that can be learned in how you can sort of make lemons out of lemonade, make lemonade rather out of lemons when it comes to technology during these downtimes?
Well, I'm not a financial guy, and of course that doesn't inhibit me from talking about finance. But I really believe there is one fundamental solution to this entire problem that you talk about. Now, the ups and downs, well, we're going to keep having them. Somehow or other, we have to get the average up higher. And the difference between the haves and the haves-not, It really should be decreasing, and it's actually increasing. And we have to solve that problem. It's my judgment that most of the problems that we see around the world now, whether it's the Occupy Wall Street here, or the Arab uprising, or villagers rising up in China, none of those things are what you would call economic or political or religious. They're almost all based upon the difference between the haves and the have-not. And what's the solution to that? Well, there are two things you could do. You could take this pie that we have that is all the productivity that we all create, and you could redistribute it. And of course, the result of that is that whereas before you had poor people and wealthy people, and now everybody is going to be poor. So redistribution is not an answer. The only real answer is to make a bigger pie. And the only way to do that is to increase productivity. And one of the things that I do take pride in is for what little impact I had on the creation of the cell phone. One of the things that cell phones do is increase productivity. They make every one of you more productive, whether you like it or not, and somehow or other that increase in productivity ends up with a better life for everybody. I think we've only just begun that kind of thing. I think the combination of personal communications, the internet, and social networking is going to be the next revolution. And the biggest outcome of that revolution is going to be vast improvements in productivity. That's how we're going to eliminate poor people and eliminate this gap between the haves and have-nots.
On a somewhat lighter note, back in 2010, when you were interviewed by Morley Safer for 60 Minutes, you talked about Twitter and the fact that you only had about 17 followers at the time. What do you think of Twitter, and how many followers do you have now?
Well, I have as of last night, 5,059.
Nice.
And I'm Marty Mobile. And how many people here are on Twitter? Okay, I expect to have at least 100 more followers. And I promise you, I'll start tweeting. Would you believe that I have acquired all these almost 5,100 followers, and I hardly ever tweet? But I believe in the concept. I believe that we have all kinds of new tools for communicating, and here is where I'm going to contradict myself. The younger people who have started a tweet when they were 6 years old or 8 or 10 years old, these tools are going to be a part of their fabric. They're going to be a part of their lives, and they're going to use these tools in ways that all of us older people, and I'm including everybody in this room, not just Silvers, we could never even conceive of that. And that, the use of Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, all of the other tools, not necessarily those specific things, but tools that do those kinds of things that allow us to communicate in very different kinds of ways, and to do that 24/7 wherever we are. That capability has never existed in our history, and when we fully absorb that, which is going to take a generation or two, this is going to be a very, very different kind of world.
We are going to open it up to questions. I'd like you to get to the microphone if you have one for Martin, but as anybody who might take to that microphone as you get there, I just want to let you know that Martin's an avid skier. His favorite place is Vail, where he has what I'm told is a beautiful sort of ski and ski out home. I'm told also his wife Arlene can kick his you-know-what getting down the mountain, because she's quite a remarkable skier. But I'm wondering if you, like me, because I'm an avid skier as well, ever spend time sitting on the chairlifts where it's usually in such a beautiful, pristine environment, and you sort of think about what's next, and you think about the future. That's what I do on ski lifts.
Well, first of all, I should correct. I'm an avid skier, but an incompetent skier, just so you.
Modest guy.
And yes, I do think almost all the time
on those chairlifts.
About those.
Yeah.
Well, that's what else can you do to chairlift, unless it was you and I going up together, in which case we'd be talking.
Are there any questions for Martin? You mean I picked
Alex,
all of your minds?
Nobody ever asks the first question. You have to ask the second question. I know there is someone there.
Are you going to ask a question? Well, this is darn fine, Jody from AARP.
Martin, what I'm really interested in is the dynamic between the individual who's clearly creative and innovative, has no box around them, that allows them to produce something like the cell phone, and the fact that you also at that time worked for Motorola, which was one of the most far-sighted companies of its day. I met Bob Galvin a couple of times, and there were several things, including the first competitive intelligence unit in any company on the face of the planet, run by Jan Herring. So you had an environment in which you were kind of allowed to do this. So I'm trying to understand, were you successful unto yourself? How important also was this corporate environment?
Well, that's a wonderful question. And let me suggest to you, it had nothing to do with me. I was just really lucky. Because you are exactly right. Why Motorola tolerated me for the 29 years that I spent there, I will never understand. Because I never could quite grasp the what we call the corporate environment. And I think anybody here that's worked at a corporation knows about that, about all the constraints. You might talk about boxes.
Yeah.
Corporations are fundamentally organizations that are multiple different kinds of boxes. Everybody is constrained. I never understood those things. Bob Galvin was a personal friend, but he engendered that viewpoint throughout the company. Somebody that was a maverick that was thinking, as long as they thought productively, they were encouraged. That was not a usual kind of place, and I repeat, I was extraordinarily lucky to be there. Who knows what would have happened to me if I was... By the way, my first job was in the Bell system, which was the ultimate. And I worked there, it lasted a year, and I just give you one example. Every night I'd be sitting in this enormous bullpen with 150 engineers all sitting there busy working away, and at 5 o'clock a bell would ring, and everybody stood up and walked out. And I went to Motorola, and somehow or other, by some strange phenomenon, we'd be sitting around working, and about 10 to 5, somebody would think about some problems, and we get into a discussion, and we would leave the office when we were finished. Sounds kind of logical, but it illustrates to me the difference that you were exactly trying to present.
Thank you. My name is Andrea Berry. I would like to ask you if you had any advice for inventors, people that have concepts. The process of getting it to market, there are so many companies out here and they say, this is no guarantee that you're ever going to do it. What, if any, advice could you give in terms of getting through that process and what they might need to know to be successful?
Yeah, what you're asking me is, do you have an idea, how do you make it come to life?
From concept to
Sure.
market.
Yeah. Well, all I have is a bunch of thumb rules. Rule number one, there are no easy businesses, and it's really hard. Every step of the way, people will put obstacles in front of you, whether it's raising money, regulatory rules. I mean, if there's any way to slow you down, that will happen. So there's only one solution to that, is persistence and the lack of the fear of failure. That's one of the things, getting back to the, he disappeared. Oh, there you are. That's one of the things that I learned at Motorola. If people that reach out, that try to do things, they always will have failures. And if you nail somebody for their first failure, the time when they learn the most, you are doing a great disservice not only to them, but to yourself. So don't fear failure. But you got to be persistent and keep working at it, because it's never easy.
Thank you, sir.
And thank you so much, Martin Cooper. What a pleasure. Oh, okay, one more, and then that's it.
Marty, during the last 38 or 40 years, we've had tremendous increases in productivity resulting from technology, and yet at the same time, the division between rich and poor that you mentioned has grown greater and greater. How do you see more technology changing that? What do you see as the real change agent that's going to reverse that trend?
Or will there be an equalizing factor through technology?
Well, Larry, when you say that the gap has increased, that's most certainly true. The other thing that's happened, however, is our definition of what is poor has changed. And so we're no longer tolerant of what we would have called poor people 40 years ago. We now have increased our standards, but there's no question in my mind that the overall productivity has improved, and that in general people are better off now. But the final answer is that there are people at the bottom of this pyramid that are still not at a standard that we accept, and the only way to solve that problem is to just keep improving the productivity. And you know, the one thing about, if you haven't noticed already, I don't take many chances. I talk about the past, and nobody can argue about what happened 40 or 50 years ago, because most of the people that were my colleagues are gone. So I'm pretty safe in that area. And whenever I predict the future, I think about 2 or 3 generations from now, and so I'm totally unaccountable in that area as well. But I have a conviction that if we make the pie big enough, that some parts of that pie will be available to everybody. And in fact, think about this for a while. One of the problems we have about the haves is the haves always want more. And I suspect that applies to everybody here. You don't like to look at yourself that way. But if you could have everything that you wanted, would you really just keep reaching for more, or would you start digging into more intellectual pursuits? It's my view that when that pie gets big enough, our whole attitudes are going to change. And in fact, at that time, we're going to have much, much more equality. There's going to be enough so that everybody can have everything that they want. That's what I think the eventual outcome is.
Thank you.